The flickering streetlights cast an eerie glow over the rain-soaked cul-de-sac as John crept through the shadows, clutching a folder of incriminating documents. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. He was about to declare war on the most powerful and corrupt entity in the neighborhood, the Homeowners Association, HOA. For years, the HOA had ruled evergreen estates with an iron fist, manipulating the rules to maintain their stranglehold on the community. But tonight, John had uncovered their darkest secrets, a web of bribery, fraud, and illegal kickbacks that would bring the whole corrupt system crashing down. As he approached his house, John paused, his senses on high alert. Had the HOA already discovered his plan? He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as he noticed a glint of light reflecting off a hidden camera mounted on a nearby lamppost. They were watching his every move. Gritting his teeth, John quickened his pace, darting across the lawn and slipping inside his home. Once the door was locked behind him, he allowed himself a moment of relief, but that feeling was short-lived as he heard a sudden knock at the door. "Mr. Saunders, this is the HOA security team. Please open up. We need to discuss some irregularities in your property." John's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow, they had already discovered his findings. Clutching the folder tightly, he hesitated, his mind racing to find a way out of this trap. "Mr. Saunders, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Open the door or we'll be forced to take action." Steeling his nerves, John made a split-second decision. He couldn't back down now, not when he was so close to exposing the HOA's corruption. Squaring his shoulders, he pulled open the door, his gaze unwavering as he stared down the two burly security guards standing on his doorstep. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice laced with defiance. The guards exchanged a brief glance, then the taller one stepped forward, his face set in a menacing scowl. "We've received reports of unauthorized construction on your property, Mr. Saunders. You're in a direct violation of several HOA regulations. We're here to confiscate those documents and ensure you comply with our orders." John's grip tightened on the folder, his mind racing. He knew the stakes were high. If he surrendered the evidence, the HOA would bury it, and his chance to bring them down would be lost forever. But if he refused, the consequences could be dire. "I'm not giving you anything," he declared, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "This community has been under your control for far too long. It's time the truth came out." The guards exchanged another look, and John braced himself for their response. But just as they were about to speak, a sudden commotion erupted from the street, drawing their attention. Seizing the opportunity, John slammed the door shut and bolted it, his heart pounding in his ears. He had to get the evidence to someone who could help, someone who could take down the HOA once and for all. Rushing to the kitchen, he grabbed his car keys and made a beeline for the garage. As he started the engine and peeled out of the driveway, he couldn't help but glance back at his house, where the HOA guards were now pounding on the door, their shouts echoing through the quiet neighborhood. John knew he was now a marked man, but he was determined to see this through. The fate of Evergreen Estates, and his own family's future, hung in the balance. John's tires screeched as he sped through the rain-soaked streets, his heart pounding in his chest. The folder of incriminating evidence against the HOA felt like a ticking time bomb in the passenger seat, and he knew he had to get it to the right person before the corrupt association caught up with him. As he navigated the winding roads, he couldn't help but glance nervously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the HOA's goons in hot pursuit. The thought of what they might do to him if they caught him sent a shiver down his spine, but he steeled his resolve. He had come too far to back down now. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, John pressed on, his eyes darting from the road to the GPS on his phone, searching for the address of the one person he knew he could trust, his old friend Sarah, a tenacious investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. Finally, he pulled up to a nondescript apartment building and parked the car, his fingers trembling as he gathered the folder and hurried up the steps. He couldn't afford to waste a single moment. As he knocked urgently on Sarah's door, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the HOA's goons closing in. But the street remained eerily silent, save for the patter of raindrops against the pavement. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open and Sarah's face appeared, her brow furrowed with concern. "John, what's going on?" she asked, her gaze immediately falling on the folder in his hands. "Sarah, I need your help," John stammered, his voice shaking. "I've uncovered something huge about the HOA, and they're after me. I need you to take this and expose them before it's too late." Without hesitation, Sarah ushered him inside, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "Come on, tell me everything." As John spilled out the details of his findings, the bribery, the fraud, the illegal kickbacks, Sarah's expression grew more and more grave. She knew the HOA was a powerful force in the community, but she had never imagined the extent of their corruption. This is huge, John," she breathed, flipping through the documents with a sense of urgency. "If you're right, this could bring the whole HOA down. But you have to be careful. They're not going to let you get away with this without a fight. John nodded, his jaw set with determination. I know. That's why I need you to take this and run with it. I can't keep this evidence safe for much longer, and you're the only one I trust to do something about it. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she considered the gravity of the situation. All right, I'll do it. But you need to get somewhere safe, John. The HOA is not going to take this lying down. Nodding, John turned to leave, but Sarah grabbed his arm, her gaze piercing. Be careful, okay? I can't lose you too. John managed a weak smile, his heart swelling with gratitude for his old friend. I'll be fine. Just promise me you'll expose the truth, no matter what. With that, he hurried back out into the rain, his mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios. Where could he hide from the HOA's reach? And how long could he stay one step ahead of them? As he sped away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadows seemed to close in around him, and the eerie silence of the night only heightened his sense of unease. John knew that the moment he had stepped foot outside his door, he had become a marked man. The HOA would stop at nothing to silence him and bury the truth. But he was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The fate of his community and his own family's future hung in the balance. The rain pounded against the windshield as John drove aimlessly through the dimly lit streets, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. He had entrusted the incriminating evidence against the HOA to Sarah, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the corrupt association came after him. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he scanned the area, his eyes darting from one shadowy corner to the next, half expecting to see the HOA's goons closing in. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He knew of a remote cabin deep in the woods, a place he had visited with his family years ago. It was the perfect hideout, far from the reach of the HOA and their powerful connections. Decisive now, John turned the car towards the outskirts of the city, his foot pressing down on the accelerator. As the familiar landscape gave way to thick forests and winding roads, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could escape the HOA's clutches and live to fight another day. But just as he was beginning to relax, a set of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, closing in rapidly. His heart leaked into his throat as he recognized the distinctive SUV of the HOA security team. Damn it, he cursed, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the steering wheel even tighter. He couldn't afford to be caught now, not when he was so close to the safety of the cabin. Pushing the car to its limits, John weaved through the twisting roads, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of an escape route. But the HOA's vehicle was relentless, its massive size and powerful engine slowly gaining on him. Panic began to set in as John realized he was running out of options. The cabin was still several miles away, and he knew he couldn't outrun the HOA's goons forever. He had to think fast. Suddenly, an idea formed in his mind. Gritting his teeth, he made a sharp turn, veering off the main road and into the dense forest. The SUV behind him followed, its massive tires crunching through the underbrush. John's heart pounded in his chest as he navigated the treacherous terrain, his car bouncing and swerving as he pushed it to its limits. The HOA's vehicle was larger and heavier, and he knew it would have a harder time navigating the narrow, winding roads. As he rounded a sharp turn, he caught a glimpse of the cabin in the distance, its familiar, silhouetted beacon of hope in the darkness. Summoning every ounce of his focus, he pushed the car even harder, his eyes darting back and forth between the road and the rearview mirror. But just as he was about to reach the cabin, disaster struck. A massive tree branch, weakened by the heavy rain, suddenly came crashing down, blocking the road ahead. John slammed on the brakes, the car skidding and sliding across the muddy ground. He braced himself for the impact, but the crash never came. Instead, the car came to a stop just inches from the fallen tree, leaving him trapped. Cursing under his breath, John glanced frantically in the rearview mirror, his heart sinking as he saw the HOA's SUV closing in. There was no way out. He was cornered. As the massive vehicle pulled up behind him, John steeled himself for what was to come. He knew the HOA would stop at nothing to silence him, and he couldn't help but wonder if this was the end of the line. But even as the security guards approached his car, their faces twisted with menace, John refused to back down. He had come too far to give up now, and he was determined to fight to the bitter end. The fate of his community and his own future hung in the balance, and he was ready to do whatever it took to ensure the truth came to light. The rain pounded against the car as John sat trapped, surrounded by the menacing figures of the HOA security guards. His heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he refused to show any signs of fear. He had come too far to back down now. Steeling his nerves, he met the gaze of the lead guard, his eyes narrowed with defiance. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice surprisingly steady. The guard's lips curled into a sinister grin. "You know exactly what we want, Mr. Saunders. Those documents you stole from us, hand them over, and maybe we'll go easy on you." John's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his mind racing. He couldn't give up the evidence, not when it was the only chance to expose the HOA's corruption. But he also knew that refusing would only put his life in greater danger. "I don't have them," he lied, hoping his voice sounded convincing. "I already gave them to someone who can expose your dirty little secrets." The guard's expression darkened and he leaned in, his breath hot on John's face. "Don't play games with us, Saunders. We know you have the documents, and we're not leaving until we get them back. So I suggest you start talking or things are going to get very unpleasant for you." John swallowed hard, his mind racing for a way out of this impossible situation. He couldn't give up the evidence, but he also couldn't put his life on the line. Suddenly, an idea began to form in his mind. All right, he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'll tell you where the documents are, but I want to guarantee that you'll leave me and my family alone." The guard eyed him skeptically, but John could see the glint of interest in his eyes. "We'll consider it," the guard replied, his tone laced with threat. "But you better make it worth our while." Nodding, John took a deep breath and launched into his plan. "The documents are with a friend of mine, a journalist named Sarah. She's been investigating the HOA for months, and she's determined to expose your corruption. If you let me go, I'll give you her address, and you can go retrieve the documents yourselves." The guard's eyes narrowed as he considered the offer, and John held his breath, praying that the ploy would work. "All right, Saunders," the guard finally said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You got a deal, but if you're lying to us, you can bet there will be hell to pay." Nodding in relief, John quickly provided Sarah's address, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. If the HOA's goons believed him and went after Sarah instead, it would buy him more time to find a way to stop them. As the guards returned to their SUV and sped off into the night, John let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling. He had bought himself some time, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the HOA realized they had been duped. Glancing around, he spotted a small, overgrown trail leading deeper into the woods, and an idea began to form in his mind. If he could reach the cabin and hide there, he might just have a chance of evading the HOA's clutches. Without a moment's hesitation, he abandoned his car and set off into the darkness, his feet pounding against the muddy ground as he raced towards the safety of the cabin. He knew he couldn't stop, not now, not when so much was at stake. The fate of his community and his own future hung in the balance, and he was determined to do whatever it took to ensure the truth came to light. John's lungs burned as he sprinted through the dense, rain-soaked forest, his feet sinking into the mud with every step. Behind him, the sound of the HOA's SUV faded into the distance, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they realized he had tricked them. As he pushed deeper into the woods, the familiar outline of the cabin came into view, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Relief flooded through him, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline as he considered what might be waiting for him there. What if the HOA had already dispatched their goons to the cabin, anticipating his move? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he couldn't afford to let fear slow him down. He had to reach the cabin and find a way to contact Sarah to make sure she was safe. Gritting his teeth, he picked up the pace, his legs burning as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The rain had turned the ground into a slippery mess, and he had to be careful not to lose his footing and give away his position. Finally, he reached the cabin, his heart pounding in his chest. Cautiously, he approached the door, his hand hovering over the handle as he listened for any sounds of movement inside. The eerie silence only heightened his sense of unease, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Steeling his nerves, he slowly pushed the door open, his eyes scanning the interior for any signs of danger. The cabin was dark and eerily still, save for the patter of rain against the windows. Exhaling a shaky breath, John stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room as he searched for a place to hide. He needed to keep a low profile and figure out his next move, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA was closing in. As he made his way towards the back of the cabin, a sudden noise from the kitchen caught his attention. His heart leaped into his throat and he froze, his eyes darting towards the source of the sound. Slowly, he crept forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the closest object he could use as a weapon. But just as he was about to strike, a familiar voice rang out, freezing him in his tracks. "John, is that you?" Blinking in surprise, John lowered the makeshift weapon, his eyes widening as he recognized the figure standing in the kitchen. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" The journalist stepped forward, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "I came to warn you. The HOA goons showed up at my place, but I managed to get away. I figured this would be the safest place for us to hide." John felt a surge of gratitude and dread wash over him. On one hand, he was relieved to have his trusted friend by his side, but on the other, he knew that their presence at the cabin had only painted a bigger target on their backs. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, his gaze darting towards the door. "The HOA is onto us, and they won't stop until they find those documents." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. All right, then let's go. I got a plan, but we need to move quickly. Without another word, they hurried towards the door, their footsteps muffled by the sound of the rain. John knew that they were running out of time, but he also knew that they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The fate of his community and their own lives hung in the balance, and he was more determined than ever to see this through. The rain pounded against the windshield as Sarah and John sped through the winding country roads, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and determination. They had managed to escape the cabin just in time, narrowly evading the clutches of the HOA's goons, but they knew that the pursuit was far from over. "Where are we going?" John asked, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he navigated the treacherous terrain. "The local news station," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "If we can get the story out there, it might be the only way to keep the HOA from silencing us for good." John nodded, his mind racing with the implications of their plan. He knew that the HOA was a powerful and well-connected organization, and that taking them on in the public eye would be a risky gamble. But he also knew that they had no other choice. As they approached the news station, Sarah quickly directed John to a secluded parking lot at the rear of the building. "We need to be discreet," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The HOA has eyes and ears everywhere, and they'll be looking for us." John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest as they hurried towards the building. The rain had let up, but the air was still thick with tension, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Once inside, Sarah led him to a small conference room, where a team of reporters and editors were already gathered, their faces etched with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What's going on, Sarah?" one of the reporters asked, his brow furrowed with worry. "We've uncovered a massive corruption scandal within the HOA," Sarah replied, her voice steady and confident. "John here has the evidence, and we need to get this story out there as soon as possible." The reporters exchanged a series of glances, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. "You're serious?" one of them asked, her eyes widening. "The HOA? But they're practically untouchable." Sarah nodded, her gaze unwavering. "That's exactly why we need to act now. This is our chance to expose their dirty secrets and bring them down once and for all." As John presented the incriminating documents, the reporters pored over them, their faces growing graver with each passing minute. The scale of the HOA's corruption was staggering, and they knew that this story could rock the community to its core. "All right, let's do this," the lead reporter said, his voice laced with determination. "We'll get this story out there as soon as possible. You two need to lay low. The HOA won't take this lying down." Sarah and John nodded, their relief palpable. They knew that the battle was far from over, but at least they had taken the first step towards exposing the truth. As they made their way back to the car, John couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The HOA was a powerful and relentless foe, and he knew that they wouldn't go down without a fight. "Do you really think this will work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression was resolute, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "It has to," she replied. "If we don't stop the HOA now, they'll only continue to tighten their grip on the community. We have to take them down, no matter the cost." John nodded, his jaw set with determination. He knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but he was more than ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. The fate of his community and his own future hung in the balance, and he was determined to see this through to the bitter end. The air crackled with tension as the news report unfolded on the television screen, the anchor's voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Shocking revelations have surfaced regarding the corruption and abuse of power within the Evergreen Estates Homeowners Association. Earlier today, a local journalist and a concerned resident presented our news team with a trove of incriminating documents, exposing a web of bribery, fraud, and illegal kickbacks that have allowed the HOA to maintain an iron grip on the community. John and Sarah watched with bated breath, their eyes fixed on the screen as the report continued. They knew that the moment the story went public, the HOA would be mobilizing every resource at their disposal to silence them, and the stakes had never been higher. "The documents," the anchor continued, "paint a disturbing picture of a rogue organization that has systematically exploited and manipulated the residents of Evergreen Estates for its own financial gain. From levying exorbitant fines and fees to illegally appropriating community funds, the HOA's actions have left many homeowners feeling powerless and betrayed." John felt a surge of vindication, but it was quickly tempered by a sense of unease. He knew that the HOA would not take this lying down, and he could only imagine the lengths they would go to in order to protect their stranglehold on the community. "The journalist and the whistleblower," the anchor went on, "are currently in hiding, fearing for their safety. We have attempted to reach out to the HOA for comment, but all of our calls have gone unanswered." As the report concluded, Sarah turned to John, her expression grave. "The HOA is going to come after us with everything they've got," she said, her voice hushed. "We just poked a very dangerous bear, and I'm not sure we're prepared for the fallout." John nodded, his mind racing. "We need to be proactive," he said, his voice laced with determination. "The HOA may have the power and the resources, but we have the truth on our side. We need to use that to our advantage." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she considered his words. "What do you have in mind?" "We need to go public," John replied, his gaze unwavering. "We need to rally the community to show them that we're not afraid and that we're willing to fight for their rights." Sarah's expression shifted to one of uncertainty. "That's risky, John. The HOA has eyes and ears everywhere, and they'll be looking to silence us as soon as we step out of the shadows." "I know," John said, his voice steady, "but we can't afford to play by their rules anymore. We need to take the fight to them, and the only way to do that is to get the community on our side." Sarah paused, her mind clearly working overtime. "All right," she said finally, "but we'll need to be careful. The HOA is not going to go down without a fight, and we need to be prepared for whatever they throw at us." John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm ready," he said, his voice laced with determination. "This is our only chance to take back our community, and I'm not going to let the HOA win." With a deep breath, they set out, their footsteps echoing through the deserted streets as they made their way towards the heart of the community. The battle lines had been drawn, and the fate of Evergreen Estates hung in the balance. The air was thick with tension as John and Sarah stood before the gathered crowd of Evergreen Estates residents, their faces a mix of fear and determination. The news report had sent shockwaves through the community, and the residents were hungry for answers and for justice. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice carrying a sense of urgency. "As you've seen, the Homeowners Association has been running a corrupt and abusive regime, and it's time we put a stop to it." The crowd erupted in a chorus of angry murmurs, their faces etched with a mix of outrage and disbelief. "How long has this been going on?" one resident shouted, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Years," John replied, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "The HOA has been exploiting and manipulating us for far too long, and it's time we took back control of our community." The crowd erupted in a roar of approval, their fists pumping the air in a display of solidarity. John felt a surge of hope, but he knew that the battle was far from over. "So what's the plan?" another resident called out, his voice laced with determination. John and Sarah exchanged a glance, their minds racing with the weight of the task ahead. "We need to organize," Sarah replied, her voice steady and resolute. "We need to rally the community to show the HOA that we won't back down. And we need to use every legal and political tool at our disposal to take them down." The crowd erupted in a chorus of cheers, their energy palpable. John felt a sense of pride and purpose, knowing that they were no longer alone in this fight. But just as the momentum was building, a sudden commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd, drawing everyone's attention. A group of burly men in dark suits were pushing their way through the throng, their faces set with a menacing scowl. "That's them," one of the men shouted, his finger pointing directly at John and Sarah. "Those are the traitors who stole our documents." The crowd erupted in a chorus of boos and jeers, their anger palpable. But before they could react, the men surged forward, their hands reaching for their weapons. John and Sarah instinctively ducked, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had known that the HOA would retaliate, but they had never imagined it would be this brazen. As the crowd scattered in a panic, John and Sarah found themselves surrounded, the HOA's goons closing in on them. They were trapped with nowhere to run. "It's over, Saunders," one of the men growled, his eyes narrowed with malice. "You and your little journalist friend are going to pay for what you've done." John felt a chill run down his spine, but he refused to back down. He had come too far to give up now. "You're wrong," he replied, his voice laced with defiance. "This is just the beginning. The truth is out there, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The man's expression darkened, and he raised his hand, his fingers curling around the grip of his weapon. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, a sudden commotion erupted from the crowd, drawing everyone's attention. A group of police officers had arrived on the scene, their sirens blaring and their weapons drawn. "Freeze!" one of the officers shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. "Drop your weapons and step away from the civilians." The HOA's goons hesitated, their eyes darting from the officers to John and Sarah. They knew they were outnumbered and outmatched, and they had no choice but to surrender. As the police handcuffed the men and led them away, John and Sarah stood in stunned silence, their hearts racing with a mix of relief and disbelief. They had won the first round, but they knew that the battle was far from over. The HOA was a powerful and relentless foe, and they would stop at nothing to regain control of the community. But for now, they savored their victory, knowing that the truth was on their side, and that the residents of Evergreen Estates were finally ready to fight back.